Well, welcome back to the Cordell and Cordell and Men's Divorce Podcast. I'm Scott Trout, Managing Partner, CEO of Cordell and Cordell. We continue to bring you information for guys before, during, and after divorce, as usual, twice each week. Don't forget to also check out our virtual town halls. We just had one. We're going to be having another one in March. You can find out all the material on our YouTube channel for podcasts like this and every virtual town hall that we've had over the last year. If you have questions after listening to this podcast, you can send us an email at townhalls@cordelllaw.com. That's townhalls, HALLS, at cordelllaw.com. We can answer those questions during a podcast or during our next virtual town hall when you can tune in and you get your answers to those questions. Always keep in mind this isn't legal advice. We want to make sure we have a consult with you and no attorney-client relationship is existing as a result. So, that consult is important. 866 Dad's Law. We want to hear the specific facts of your case and be able to provide you some good strategic guidance along the way. So today, no different, joined by Jacob Smith over in Virginia. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about something that I think actually, when I saw the title and we were talking a little bit off camera, jurisdiction, which actually called the UCC JEA, Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act, which used to be called the UCC JA. I think it's so relevant as we're rolling out of the pandemic because early on, and I remember doing a podcast early on in, say, March of 2020, where we were seeing quite a few moms or taking their children out of state and either going to live with family and then permanently relocating. And really, as I think through it, it kind of brings up this UCC JEA. We see this a lot, and where clients say, hey, my wife's left and she's relocated back to family or back to home. So maybe start with just a high overview of why and what is the UCC JEA and why should guys be concerned about it?
Right. Yeah. So the UCC JEA was an idea to help make there be consistent laws between all the states. Most states, I think, except Massachusetts, to my knowledge, right now has adopted the UCC JEA with maybe some minor variations. But it's essentially a way for situations in which we have parents moving state to state for us to know where any custody or visitation action needs to be heard and which court it needs to be in. So that's what we're dealing with the UCC JEA.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're talking high level for guys listening, and I think what's important is as lawyers, there's this very first thing you have to determine whether or not there's jurisdiction, personal and subject matter. It's kind of the law school elements, and we go back to our first year, and we have to decide, okay, it basically boils down, as you say, where should this case be heard, period. And that's important to guys, especially when they're living in one state and their spouse is living in another. Which state has jurisdiction? Where do you want to be? I mean, there's a huge strategic thought process here. You also want to look at, all right, where is better for me? Is there, like, for example, does Virginia have better laws than Missouri? Does Texas have a better child support law than Kansas? A lot comes into play. And when, for example, we have clients come in the door, we ask, have you lived in the state for X number of days, 90 plus days, 6 months? There's all these numbers actually matter. I really enjoy this argument because it gets very technical. And there's some strategic ways to deal with it. So let's kind of break it down, because there may be a guy listening right now that thinks, okay, yeah, my wife has moved out of state, because it's a different point about moving from county to county, city to city within the state, where you're talking about venue. And that's kind of where the location is. But let's talk about something where the approach that the court will take, which is starting with the initial custody determination, and what do they look at? So guys can you have to take some notes here, because this is really important when you have a conversation with your lawyer.
Right. So when you have a situation where there is no custody order, right, no court has made any ruling about anything, we're going to try to determine where the home state jurisdiction is. Under the UCC JEA, adopted by most states, typically it's the state where a child has lived continuously for the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's for a child like a newborn under 6 months, it's where they've been since birth. So that's typically what we're looking at is a 6-month time period immediately preceding when you file. Yeah. So that's an important date to consider as well.
And they mention the word home state. I mean, that's used in the UCC JEA, and the court has to make that determination. And I want to caution guys as they think two things. One is every time I hear this, and we've seen in the virtual town halls, guys have said, hey, my spouse left and, you know, she left 5 months ago. And I got red flag sirens going off like crazy because you've got to do something within that 6-month window before, you know, that's kind of one of the, you know, check marks. 6 months. So, I mean, you agree, obviously, that 6-month window is critical to take action before 6 months and a day kicks in.
Absolutely. Really, the sooner you can act upon something, the better, especially if the 6 months before the child had been there in your state, right? That's where it should happen. And that's where you as the dad ought to take that initiative to make sure you just assert your rights immediately. And this is one of those things that we always say is be the first to file. Let's just be assertive on that. And especially because there's a 6-month issue, you can lose that opportunity if you're in a state that has like a really good custody and visitation setup and laws. You want to make sure you keep it there because some states are definitely more friendly to dads than others.
Yeah, completely. I mean, there's all kinds of things. And some guys may be thinking, well, gosh, she's been gone 9 months. I mean, all is not lost. You have to look to intent. You know, there's kidnapping issues. You know, you can't abscond for the purposes of securing jurisdiction.
Even in the toughest of times, there are usually opportunities for relief. Many husbands and dads listening now are struggling to stay current on alimony and child support orders. You should know that this crisis may allow you to modify your support obligations, but time is of the essence. If you're a guy needing help right now, not someday when things are back to normal, call us at Cordell and Cordell. This is what we do.
Significant connection. That's always been something used by the court. What does that mean when guys hear significant connection with the state?
Right. So when we're talking about a significant connection, a lot of times I see this in issues where maybe the dads and the mom have lived in separate states for a while and have had just status quo of like a month on, a month off, right? So they're maybe equal time. What we're then looking at is, you know, which state has a more significant connection? Had the parents both lived in one state together with the child beforehand? Does mom, who's now left, does she have family there? Has she worked there? Right, we're looking to see which state might have a little bit more. And sometimes a lot of what we're looking at is where the evidence is, right? Where our witnesses potentially, you know, if like a government organization like social services or child protective services has been involved in the past, you know, or the child has a school or a doctor here, those are those significant connections that might tip the scales when there isn't a clear home state in favor of one state over another.
Yeah. And I think, you know, been doing this for a while, and a lot of judges like first to file. You know, that's why there's some urgency to take action here. And that is get on file first. Even if there's a question of jurisdiction, you want to assert your rights. And I've had many cases where, for example, I had a case that was filed down in the Virgin Islands and in Illinois. And we were fighting over which case had jurisdiction. You know, mom had gone to the Virgin Islands and had been there for almost 6 months. And she had enrolled him in school. They had made friends. So she was clearly trying to establish the significant connections. She got doctors and dentists, and it was crazy. And she, you know, alleging, you know, physical abuse, and that's why she had to leave. And so I think that's always important for guys to think about is, gosh, don't sit, file, get on file. So, you know, that deals with the issue of no other decree, nothing's been filed, nothing's been heard. What happens now post-divorce both parties, tend to, we have a society where we used to, at least, and we would go from state to state and freedom of travel. Obviously may be different, but exclusive and continuing jurisdiction, things where people have left the state. What happens? Does the UCC JEA come into play?
Yeah, so the UCC JEA is going to say that once a court has established that home state jurisdiction or that jurisdiction under a significant connection, that state will continue to have the exclusive jurisdiction over any modifications or enforcements of any order. So I'm in Virginia right now. Virginia enters a custody order. One parent moves out of state. Virginia still is the place to go for any modifications or any enforcement until Virginia itself relinquishes that jurisdiction to another state.
Yeah, and I think there's always some caution too. Mom has custody, you allow her to relocate. Let's just say it's Virginia and she relocates to Oregon. Been there a couple years, kids have gone to school. What happens? Is she going to be required to come all the way back to Virginia to modify? I've seen judges say, look, I'm going to go ahead and implement the significant connections. I know the decretal state's Virginia, but I'll apply Virginia law, but we can hold it here. You consented. All that comes into play, right?
Right. Yeah. In my experience, even recently since the pandemic hit, I've had some of these issues come up, and it's become often what triggers, one thing that is triggered is that, at least under Virginia's specific statutes, that says that the judge here is supposed to go and continue the case and go call the judge in the other jurisdiction, and they'll talk and they'll decide which state is actually the better jurisdiction. I had a case where there was a Missouri order, and that got, and Mom moved here to Virginia years ago, and then she decided she wanted to attempt to modify or enforce something. We initially were able to get the court to allow the order to be registered or domesticated here in Virginia for enforcement purposes. And then the judge here said, well, I've got to talk to the Clay County, Missouri judge, and we'll talk about what is actually the better place. And in this case, the judges actually determined that Virginia was the appropriate place for jurisdiction. So Missouri then relinquished its continuing exclusive jurisdiction here to Virginia.
Yeah, and once that happens, Virginia's on forever, right?
Yeah, until there's something else that comes up, and if neither party lives in a state, any court can really determine that state no longer has jurisdiction, right? So if both Mom and Dad have moved out of Missouri, then Virginia or whatever state can say, well, Missouri no longer has jurisdiction, we're going to take it.
And that's always the question for guys. Okay, neither of us live in Virginia where we got divorced. We're now in separate states and she has custody. Where do I file? That's always the question. If it's child support, do I file where I live? Do I file where she lives? Where's right? Is that also, UCC JEA perhaps?
Yeah, so specifically for support, doesn't fall under the UCC JEA. That's a whole other one. But typically then we are looking more at that significant connection. I actually had this kind of case come up where we had an Illinois custody order, and as part of that, the parents decided to do a 1 month on, 1 month off with their daughter. Dad still lived in Illinois. Mom had moved here to Virginia. A couple months ago, Dad moved to New Hampshire, where his family is. And Mom then filed to amend everything here in Virginia, and the court here decided that Virginia had jurisdiction. Even though we had tried to argue against it, the unfortunate thing is my client came in too late, and he should have filed up in New Hampshire if he'd wanted it to have any kind of real argument for it to be there. But because Mom filed first here, the court said, well, Illinois doesn't have jurisdiction. Clearly, daughter's been here every other month for the last 5 years. We're having jurisdiction here. Yeah.
And, when you talk about child support, I mentioned this briefly in the virtual town hall. I had a case that went to the Supreme Court. We represented, I did a guy who lived in Oklahoma. They were divorced in Oklahoma. Wife moved to Missouri, and Missouri has much more broad emancipation. At the time, it was age 21, and Oklahoma was 18. Mom moved here, tried to file a modification, and the child was 20. And so the court here wanted to go ahead and grant the modification, and we argued that, hey, you have to follow the decretal state when it comes to child support. It can't make it bigger by simply moving. And so that's another thing for guys to think about when you think of the JEA. When it comes to custody, think about support and your decree and where it was issued. It should control, but you want to find out from a lawyer and get that legal advice through a consultation. So just as we continue, kind of wrap it up, as we talk about the JEA, emergency jurisdiction, there's some reference to it in the UCC JEA. What does that mean for guys?
Yeah, so emergency jurisdiction it's a really narrow way for almost any state to have jurisdiction over a custody matter. And this is typically when there is like immediate and irreparable harm that would be done to the child, typically physically, unless the court were to step in and make some sort of order. Now this, if there's already another court that has jurisdiction, the court will only exercise emergency jurisdiction long enough for things to be filed in the initial court and for it to be handled at that point. Sometimes you can have this emergency jurisdiction that might ultimately become that initial determination as well. But if there's, so let's say I have a court order from Virginia, and then mom goes to Utah with the kids to keep the kids safe, she can file in Utah and allege abuse. And Utah's court could initially say, well, we're going to give emergency custody to mom right now, but Virginia now has to get involved and figure it out.
Yeah, kind of a status quo. I mean, I've had that. I've used it when mom has threatened. Dad lived in Missouri, mom lived in Illinois. Illinois appeared to be the home state, but we really wanted to try to get something here. We used emergency jurisdiction to get a restraining order and a temporary custody order, knowing full well we probably wind up in Illinois, but we felt friendlier confines to get an emergency order over here. So again, it's something, it's a very complex from the layperson's point of view, the UCC JEA, but when you've, like you and I and everyone here have dealt with it, it becomes straightforward, but it's always an element to be considered. And also to be aware of if you have a spouse who's picked up and left. You got to figure out not only state, but venue, like what city. I've had people move from city to city across the, the state, from St. Louis to Kansas City, and establish venue up there. That we may not want to fight our battle up in Kansas City. So there's all kinds of things when it comes to that. And that's why I think UCC JEA discussion was a great one today. So Jacob, thanks for joining and enlightening guys at least a little bit on this topic.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. It is, if nothing else, it's just a way for men to kind of spot potential issues.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've found great here in Cordell is we have offices all across, so we can talk to the other attorneys in those specific jurisdictions. That was very helpful for me in one of my cases recently.
Yeah, and we've had those where we have an attorney in one state and an attorney in the other, and we're handling it together and we're coordinating. And I think that is the benefit. We talked about this yesterday in the virtual town hall, where we often send an email to all 300 and we're getting advice from each other. And it's kind of the power of numbers and the power of size across the country. So it's a good point. Great. So, hey, thanks for joining again.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
We'll continue to join us for our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. You'll get an update and an alert when there's a new podcast that's posted twice each week. Check us out. Give us a review. Love to hear from you. And also go to CordellCordell.com and register for the March virtual town hall coming up, where you get a chance and opportunity to log in, ask questions live, and get answers right then and right there. So until next time, have a great week.